Hi, Dato' Sri. Hi, Dato' Sri.
Yes.
I'm Vignesh from Bernama. So, Dato' Sri, I would like to ask on the Timor-Leste status after a few days of deliberation and various level meetings, because earlier the Prime Minister was giving candies to the media personnel.
The essential to ASEAN, you mean?
Status of Timor-Leste.
Well, Timor-Leste was considered. Of course, we have been working very hard. There were, parameters and pillars that need to be met: political, economic, legal, and they have tried very hard. Malaysia and Indonesia and a number of countries have assisted in many possible ways to ensure that they meet these preconditions set up consistently even prior to this for any entry into ASEAN. And I would say that we are quite satisfied. So the decision was clearly to agree that they would become and be accepted as a full member by the next session in October. But of course, subject to one or two actions or reform to be undertaken, particularly to fulfill one or two conditions on the economic pillar. But the decision, the consensus was that we'll do whatever is necessary to ensure that they come in by October into ASEAN as a full member. I think that is also in the statement. Yeah. All right?
Dato' Sri, Irene from the Associated Press. I just two short questions. Number one, is ASEAN planning to launch FTA talks with GCC? And number two,
planning to launch what?
FTA talks. And number two, there are some views that ASEAN...
The first question, the answer is yes. Yeah. Second?
That ASEAN seems to be tilting towards China with more partnerships and alliances. What's your view on this?
There's been this perception all along. That's why I made it clear in my original statement to the ASEAN leaders that on the after the recommendations by the foreign ministers in their first meeting in January in Langkawi, is to continue to engage both with the United States and China, at the same time with other countries. But so following that, I wrote to President Donald J. Trump to say that the foreign ministers, on the recommendation of foreign ministers, we agree to proceed with United States ASEAN Summit. That was written. Then we have this ASEAN-GCC-China Summit. So I don't think it's tilting in any way. I mean, if it's tomorrow, I receive a letter from President Trump to say, yes, we'll have a summit in June, or not June, it's too fast, but then in the next few months, I mean, we don't have a problem. What is the ASEAN's position? It's centrality. What is the focus? Welfare, well-being of our people, economic relations, trade, investments. So if it means working with the Chinese, yes, we'll do. The United States, yes, we have to, because as you know, Malaysia in particular is considered to have become the hub for semiconductor, and over 60% of our exports are to the United States. It makes a lot of sense to continue to engage and have reasonably good relations.
One last question from the media.
I'll try one more time. Dato' Sri, Jan Hino from AFP. Perhaps it's a forward-looking question. I think my colleagues have asked most of the other questions that I wanted to ask, but perhaps it's a forward-looking question. Can you give us an idea what your expectation is when ASEAN meets again in October? What would you like to see at that point have happened, and what are your expectations for the next meeting? Thank you.
Thank you. You know, this experience due to the work of many of our officials and then translated into this sort of recommendation is quite unprecedented. Things that normally would be deliberated or discussed in October has been done now. And we are moving forward. That, I think, to my mind, is a major change. Even on the issue of Myanmar, the consensus to continue to engage. And now we have gone to a stage where both parties are now in consultation, although at the lower key level, and to just focus on prolonged ceasefire or expanded ceasefire, then, or extended ceasefire, I'm sorry, then humanitarian assistance, and then proceeding with that, the initial discussion, but subjected to or confined to the broad parameters under the 5-point consensus. All right? Now, to me, it is certainly not a departure, but major progress in terms of getting them in. Timor-Leste, for example, after being protracted over negotiations with terms and no real consensus, but this time, finally, we reach a consensus. On tariff, for example, while proceeding with bilateral negotiations, Zafar was there in the States, but the consensus was to have some sort of understanding amongst ASEAN that decisions should not be at the expense of any other country. So we will have to protect the turf of 650 or 660 million people. So I think, to me, is a major progress. Now, from there, of course, the ministers, various ministries and the officials will have to work on what can then be affected in terms of real implementation of programs by October. Now, if you see the spirit of the ASEAN consensus and determination to be, I, of course, participate a long time ago and recently, these last 2.5, 3 years, I've never seen such a plain, strong commitment. There's no choice. There's we must take whatever is necessary. FTAs, of course, GCC, FTA with EU, economic, intra-ASEAN trade, everybody admit something more to be done, more concrete. So by October, we want to see results. At the same time, we have PIANEGA, and then we have IMTGT. I mean, all these are being discussed, not in terms of pronouncements, but to affect real change would benefit our ordinary person. And I really sense this as a huge, dramatic change in terms of attitude. We want it done, and everything must be in the name of ASEAN. I mean, people talk about even South China Sea was discussed in the Code of Conduct. And we can see this is exchanges even between the Philippines and Premier Lee Chiang. Sometimes through me, but sometimes directly. I'm not saying that all issues can be resolved now, but at least there is real, meaningful, positive engagement. And that is the new spirit of ASEAN. I am personally, of course, excited because I can see this more seriousness. Because otherwise, we talk about cohesiveness, to working together, but in terms of intra-ASEAN trade, in terms of making common decision to protect our turf in ASEAN, in geopolitical issues, sometimes we do not necessarily share, because people have their own national agenda. But not this time. They say, yes, we can go on to bilateral meetings, we can continue with bilateral engagements, but never, ever sacrifice the interests of the ordinary person and the interests of ASEAN as a whole. Terima kasih, maraming salamat, kamka, sese, nandri, lagi apa? Arigatou gozaimasu.
Thank you, members of the media.